Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room that none of us really wants to talk about, and that's our budget. Knowing your budget is really critical to planning your wedding. It's been said that when you're planning your wedding, you're going to spend more money than you've ever spent on things you've never bought before from people you've never met before. And it's really true. So, the first thing to keep in mind is what's most important to you at your wedding. What's most meaningful to you? What is it that's super important to you to include in your wedding day? You need to talk to whoever's paying for the wedding. Traditionally, the bride's parents pay for the wedding, but these days it may be the bride and groom, the groom's parents may be helping, or even extended family. We even had one bride that registered with us as her bridal registry so that guests could make contributions to help pay for their wedding video. So just get creative. Once you have that budget established and you've decided what's really important to you, start looking at wedding vendors to decide where you're going to allocate your money. It's important to get at least a high-level view of what each item is going to cost you before you make a final decision to go with a certain vendor, whether it's your hall, your caterer, your photographer. It's important to know how your overall budget looks so that you can decide what fits within your budget. Many people will allow you to place a deposit, saving your date, but allow you to decide for sure what you want later on. For example, we will allow a bride and groom to reserve their date with us and let us know by a couple months before the wedding what they have in mind so that we're sure that we have the right personnel and equipment on hand for that day. The biggest expense at most weddings is the reception. By the time you have food, beverages, entertainment, and just a variety of other details, you've spent quite a bit of money. And just between you and me, this is a place that you can most effectively trim your budget. The number of people you have at your wedding has a dramatic impact on how much your wedding costs, mostly at the reception. Say your reception is $50 a person, and that's really kind of an average here in the Omaha area. I've been to $25 a person, been to $100 a person, and I'm sure you could find someplace more expensive than that if you try. And it's important to take a realistic look at your guest list and see if there's any way that you can trim that if your budget is being strained. For example, one of the quickest and easiest ways to pull your budget back into shape is to eliminate a few people from your reception guest list. For example, say you really want an engagement shoot with your photographer and your videographer, but that's going to put you $1,000 over budget. Well, if your reception is going to cost you $50 a person, eliminating 20 people from your guest list would pay for the engagement shoots with your photographer and videographer. So this is where it comes down to what's most important to you to include as a part of your wedding. Now, that being said, part of your budget needs to be deciding this many guests for the bride's family, this many guests for the groom's family, this many guests for the bride and groom themselves, and you want to be sure to avoid hurt feelings, because the last thing you really need is a bunch of people that aren't talking to each other while you're planning your wedding and on your wedding day. So while it might be easy to cut 20 people that are your parents' co-workers or distant relatives you haven't seen in 20 years, you need to be sensitive to their feelings, and perhaps if your parents are paying for it, they'd be willing to stretch the budget an extra $1,000 to include those 20 people, and you can still have your engagement shoot. Maybe when you have this discussion, though, your parents don't want to stretch the budget by $1,000, but they do still want to invite those 20 people. And at that point, the decision becomes yours. Do I want to pay the $1,000 to have this, or is it not important to me and I will choose not to have that? So that's always a valid option too. In my own family, my aunt and uncle were getting married and my grandparents were paying for the wedding, but for whatever reason, they decided there shouldn't be a band. and it was super important to my aunt that there be a band. And she called me all in a quandary, knowing that I plan a lot of weddings and go through this with a lot of brides. And I said, if you really want the band, pay for it. And she was like, oh, I didn't think of that. So there you go. Paying for it yourself, if it's really important to you and if you can afford it, is always a valid option. Another thing to keep in mind is there's going to be a lot of small, unexpected expenses just pop up when you least expect them. That happened to me this summer when I sent my son off to college for his freshman year. We had the tuition bill from the college. We knew the major expenses that were going to be involved, the books, the airfare. Well, we hadn't anticipated him needing a refrigerator because his roommate was supposed to bring one. And then he needed a new television and some sheets and some towels and another pair of shoes. And on we had a list. So we hadn't really counted that into our budget, and it caught us kind of by surprise. And that can happen in your wedding too. Just a lot of little things toward the end that you suddenly say, oh, I haven't bought a garter. Oh, I forgot to get flowers for the guest book attendance. Just little things are going to pop up. So just be prepared and have a little bit of space in your budget for the unexpected things that can pop up right at the end. There are other places that you can trim costs to help stay within your budget as well. A really good way is to get married on a Friday or a Sunday. There's a lot of vendors that'll give a discount for getting married on not a premium day. The same is true of June weddings. You're going to pay more. The vendors won't tell you this, but you are going to pay a little bit more for a Saturday in June or even July, because that's when the demand is the highest for their services. Get married in October, you may be able to get a better deal. Get married on a Friday or a Sunday afternoon, and they may be willing to discount the cost of their services. It is definitely worth asking. Another place is, if you're straining your budget, is to talk to the individual vendors and see if there's something you can do to help rein in the expenses. Talk to your caterer. They might be able to say, well, if we have a buffet instead of a plated dinner, we could save money. If we only offer 2 choices of meat on the buffet instead of 3, we can save some money. If we have a limited bar with just draft beer and wine as opposed to a full bar with premium alcohol beverages, we might be able to save some money. So those are good places to look to help trim your budget, is to talk to each individual vendor and see if there is something you could do to help bring it within your budget. I know most vendors will be willing to have this conversation with you. Now, as a last resort, I do not advocate taking out a big loan or running up a $10,000 credit card bill. I do not advocate that at all. But this is a one-time experience. This is one day in your life. And if there is one thing that is just going to make or break your day if you don't have it, if there's one thing that you're going to regret not having forever, then it might be a time to employ using a credit card or getting a small loan from your bank and then pay for that expense over the next year or so. So again, while I don't advocate running up debt, if there is just one thing that's really going to make a difference, that's really important to you, that's one thing to consider doing. So overall, as you start your wedding planning, be sure that you have a budget and that it's realistic, and try to talk to all of your vendors and get an idea of what all their services are going to cost before you make any major commitments as far as your wedding budget.